Hello and welcome to the Tonearm, where we connect you with the people and ideas moving culture forward. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. We're putting the Tonearm's needle on Caroline Davis, a saxophonist and composer based in New York. Her new album, Fallows, just came out on Ropeadope Records. Caroline made it alone during a residency in Ucross, Wyoming, improvising and recording in a cabin using prepared saxophone techniques and a unique little instrument called an organelle to process and build sounds she'd never put to tape before. The result is 12 tracks that use the saxophone as raw material rather than a lead voice. We talk about how that music got made, what it means to deliberately avoid the sound of your own instrument, and Caroline's work teaching music inside the Sing Sing prison. Here's Caroline Davis. I would love to start with understanding a little bit about the genesis of the recordings. And by that, I kind of want to understand the element of Ucross. Like, did you go there knowing this is what you were going to come out with? Was this like your submission, or did you get there and make it up on the fly? I'm really curious about the role of the residency in the record.
I mean, in my application, I said I wanted to make a record there. I wanted to take the saxophone and make it not sound like the saxophone in certain ways, because I'm not the biggest saxophone music listening fan, which is really funny for me to say as a saxophone player. But I have to say that a lot of the music I listen to is not made by saxophones. And the people who I adore, those are kind of at the forefront of my list. Speaking of the record, and someone who I try to honor on the record, Steve Lacy, he's a person who I love, that I listen to all the time. But I didn't go in knowing this is what would come out of everything, but I did go in knowing that I really wanted to find a way to make the saxophone sound different in certain ways. And so I was looking into prepared saxophone. So you're kind of hearing a lot of experimentation on many fronts, mostly with this electronic processing unit that I have, the Organelle. But then I wanted to also explore acoustic processing of the saxophone without any technology. And so that's like one track on the recording. But I did do a lot more experimentation. So there's hours of me kind of getting leaves from outside and putting them inside of the tone holes and realizing a few times I messed my saxophone up and I had to get these tools from, I called these repair people in Wyoming and they're like, yeah, we're like 3 hours away. We're only open on these days. And I didn't have a car. So I was like, maybe I should be a little more careful with the preparations that I'm doing with these objects that I'm finding outside. But then I would come up with really interesting sounds. And one of my favorite ones was dealing with this aluminum can. So no, I didn't go in knowing that this was what I was going to get at the end, but I knew that I wanted to explore and spend more time understanding what the saxophone was capable of.
Tell me about the aluminum can.
I mean, I got some seltzer from the grocery store in Ucross. I mean, Ucross is a really tiny town of 26 people. So it wasn't in Ucross, actually. It was in Buffalo and also Sheridan. We would go to those two towns, which are larger towns, about 30 to 40 minutes away from Ucross. And so I got some seltzer, and I was just also thinking about what objects could sound nice being dragged across different parts of the saxophone. So like the bell, to turn up the microphone as loud as the input would allow me to go. And I just kind of dragged this can on the bell, and it came up with this really creepy underground, you're in a tunnel and something is like scraping against the wall kind of sound. And then I just hella reverb there. And so that's what you're hearing. And then there's water in the can. And so I'm kind of messing around with that. And it took me to a different place. I was in my headphones and really listening to where that would take me. And then I was improvising over that. But yeah, it was just a regular can of seltzer.
It wasn't some kind of special seltzer.
No. No.
Did you record the organelle there as well, or did you just lay down all the saxophone?
I recorded the organelle, yes. The organelle community is really very generous with every patch that's ever been made. And so a lot of the patches I'm using on this recording were made by other people. And I named those people the Techno Bear. He's been really useful and helpful. He's the person who made ORAC on the organelle. And if I ever was having issues, I would just go on the forum and ask, and he would get back. And then I was using those samplers to make the drum beats that you're hearing there. I made all of those drum beats, and then I would use that as a sequence, and I would kind of add and detract from the sequencer. I'm using the loop station, and then I made all the other background parts that you're hearing mostly with saxophone. There's like one piano patch on one song, but most of the other stuff is saxophone.
Tell me a little bit about that device, that instrument. What led you to it? What's attractive to you about it versus any other type of synthesis device you could work with?
Well, if I was not as lazy, I think I'd probably delve more heavily into the world of modular synthesis and have Euro racks and everything. And it's really, I look up to so many of those people around here who devote their lives to that way of making electronic music, because I love the idea of things changing all the time. I really love the idea of irregularity and something that's never the same. And so a lot of my favorite electronic music artists use that setup. Kasim Nakvi, who I play with here in New York, he is a favorite of mine. And Oren Mbarchi, I know he uses different designs in his setup and everything. But with the Organelle, I feel like I had seen someone use it as a device for generating sounds through a controller on a show. It was a bass player in here, and I was curious about what it was doing. And so I asked her about that. And she was like, I don't use it very much, but it's can be useful for processing if you want to practice certain sounds. And so I was looking into it, and I did a lot of research, and I really love the idea of having a hardware where you could pull up these different patches and you could process yourself. You could create drum beats. You could use it as a sampler. You can use the patches in there that create synthesis, and it's running on pure data. So it's kind of like Max MSP, but it's a little more buggy and open source software. That part of the community structure of people sharing this open source software and this open source patch making device, I love that part of community. And even though Max MSP is like maybe a better way to make patches, and there are pedals that allow people to do that. And I was kind of looking into that too. There's a really wonderful guitarist who I'm really inspired by named Matt Sargent. He uses a pedal setup and uses patches to interact with when he plays guitar.
It's got a very interesting tonal quality to it in that because of the software-driven nature of it, I would imagine it's sort of infinitely flexible. I don't know if it's your usage of it on this record or what, but it's got this sort of organic analog nature to it. It sounds like wood. It's really interesting. It's an interesting device.
Yeah, I mean, I love how you said that. It's amazing. I mean, there's so many developments with all the patches people have been making, and they're also developing new models now. I think they have an S2 model now. It's like really intuitive, the device. It's got these like really nice wooden buttons on the front, and you can turn on a speaker, so you can kind of use it as a way to compose. I've done that on the road when I'm writing music. I'll use it as a piano and just try to figure out sounds and ideas, and you can use it as a sequencer. There's sequencers, and so you can also use it to connect to a MIDI clock that you're referencing with other devices. And again, what I was saying before about like community and keeping everything like in the family, I really love that part of music, because I think some stuff can get really like insular or individualistic, and this community is just not that. It's so beautiful and so sharing, so open and generous. So that's another reason why I've gravitated towards this using this device.
It's interesting that you keep emphasizing the community aspect of the device, given that my impression from reading some of the materials around the making of the record, like this idea of being alone and going to the residency and sort of living in a, your own space, and this idea of having time to spend exploring the instrument and, the things you articulated earlier. There's an aloneness and a communal aspect to this. I wonder if that resonates at all, if you could unpack that a little bit for me, the sort of solitary nature of this record.
Yeah, I think when I was practicing in that little cabin, you are alone, but there's nature everywhere. And it's because you're surrounded by essentially not much. It's like the Bighorn Mountains in the distance and a creek, and the man who like made all of Ucross possible planted some trees. So now it's been declared like an important bird area. So there's birds there, which is strange because the rest of that area doesn't have that many trees. But I didn't feel that alone, also because the residency experience at Ucross involves, at that time, there were 12 other people there who were writing books and poetry and making visual art. And we would come together at dinner time and have a communal dinner. And so I never really felt alone there. So I wasn't completely in a solitary place, totally, completely alone. There are residencies that offer complete solitary time with no other people there. But that's one thing I love about the residency community is because there's always people there and you can talk to them about the book they're writing and what chapter they're on. And that the dinners are always so fun. And then again, the nature is like pretty special. I would go for runs most of the days and there were these groups of cows that they would come right up to the fence. And I've never really experienced that. How sweet and gentle they seem to be. And also there were birds constantly coming over and sitting in front of the window. There were turkeys and grouse, these geese that were making all kinds of noise, and deer every day, just deer everywhere. So it didn't feel completely alone. But yeah, the process of making things did feel like I'm sitting in a room and I'm doing this one thing and trying to get somewhere. And some days were really hard and other days were easier.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like anything, any other creative process where you're running up against the wall sometimes, and then other days it's just really flowing. I read somewhere that I think it's Ralph Waldo Emerson who used to, you know, be writing. And then once he would get into this flow state where everything was just coming out, he would stop and then shut the book or whatever, put the paper away. And so that he would come back fresh and be excited to go again the next day.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. What a crazy process, a way of doing things, you know? So I was trying a bit of that and, you know, sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And it's up and down, the creative process.
It takes a lot of faith to turn the faucet off when it's flowing. Like that, to me, that's terrifying. As if I feel like I'm in the zone, I sort of go past the point of exhaustion.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you. It's nice to just get it all out. I know a lot of artists who want to just get everything out because they're like afraid, you know, if I don't get it out now, it's not going to be there tomorrow.
Today might be the last day I'm capable of this.
Yeah. No, that's a real thing too. Like I've definitely written pieces of songs and had to go somewhere and then came back and I was like, what the hell was that? What was this thing? And then it takes me a second to get back into the zone of what I was thinking or what I was doing. I wrote something the other day. I woke up at like 3 a.m. the other day and I wrote something because it was coming to me. And then the next day I woke and I looked at it and I was like, I have no memory of doing this. It was so wild. I talked to John Zorn about that before, and he said that his favorite time to write is like in the middle of the night also, which, yeah, you kind of aren't yourself. And then also nobody's awake. And so it feels like all the energy in the place you're at is open for you to take, you know?
Yeah. There's something very special about those hours between like 1 and 4 or 1 and 5.
Yes, where everything feels, okay, it's ripe. Let's go.
Yeah. You know, you talked about exploring with the horn while you were out there. What's your experience with that type of approach to the horn? Like, were you able to do things you weren't able to do before, or was it just unpack that a little for me?
Well, yeah, to go back to the preparation thing, I know preparation is more of a piano thing. So I really love all the pianists here who are doing things with piano preparation, namely 2 of my favorite pianists, Chris Davis and Sylvie Courvoisier. Both of those pianists, I mean, there's many other people, but those 2 really come to mind in their envision of. And so I was thinking, oh, what could we do? Because saxophone we don't do a lot of that. But there is someone in France who I really admire who has been doing a bit of that. Her name is Christine Abdelnour. She's a really wonderful experimental saxophonist, alto saxophonist. I really admire what she's doing with, I think she uses sometimes like a plastic bottle maybe, or a can inside her bell also. So that's one thing that I really wanted to capture on recording. I've done a lot of that in live shows. Like I was playing last night at Sisters with Sally Gates, and I was doing a bit of that with the microphone and this other piece of paper to start the set, sound like kind of this flapping, noisy, distorted sound up against the neck, at the bottom of the neck for the saxophone, which is something else I didn't put on the record. But that was one thing I haven't done on a recording that I wanted to really get into. And that's also something I'm hoping to do more of in the future for another solo record past this. I mean, I'm not thinking about that now, but that would be really fantastic. I didn't put these tracks on the records, but I was trying to come up with some more etudes where I would just use venting on the horn to create more of a percussion kind of a track. So it'd just be like a consistent rhythm, but it was like the same pitch, but pitches that don't exist. So somewhere between the pitches. So it was more of a timbre and it would sound like a drum. And so I was doing that, but I didn't put that on the record. And then, yeah, the practice of the electronics is really intense. So I have never gone that deep, and that required a lot of practicing and just being like, what is this thing? And what is this patch? And what can it do? And what are all these buttons doing? And it takes hours. It's a different instrument, and it's like you have to shed that instrument. And I'm still practicing that instrument for these shows that are coming up for this tour. So it's endless possibilities. So that was another thing that I got really deep into at the Ucross residency, was just the time. I had hours of time to learn more about the organelle, more about how to utilize all the patches there. I've learned more about writing my own patches in Pure Data. All this stuff was just the daily stuff that I hadn't done before. Yeah.
Your mention of the venting, that technique, I was at a performance a couple of weeks ago. There was a clarinet player and he was doing that. There was like this mesmerizing quality to it. It became very repetitive and somewhere between the tone and the rhythm. I found it very compelling for something so simple or so seemingly simple.
Yeah, who was that? Do you remember?
James Falzone.
Oh, James Falzone. I love him. He's so great.
Yeah, he's wonderful. I live out in the Seattle area. I moved out here from New York. He was doing a performance. He's one of my favorite clarinetists.
Yeah, he's something else. And he's on a solo tour right now, I believe, right?
He is. Yeah, it was that performance. It was the opening night of that program that he's doing. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, I was sad that I was going to miss him out, or I missed him out here. But I also saw that he's using like a foot pedal. Is that like a harmonium kind of a thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's exactly. Yeah.
That's exactly so cool. I really can't wait to see him. He's one of my favorite clarinetists too. That's really nice.
Yeah.
And then another person I know who's looked into the venting language on the saxophone is Anna Weber. Mm-hmm. And I know she's developed some vocabulary with venting. And that's also really important to me, is the vocabulary. So I spent some time in my own notational style in my journals to create a language of which venting options I like the best. So that took time coming back. And it was more of me learning this language for myself. And also the idea of multiphonics. I'm really just getting more deeply invested in multiphonics on saxophone. And someone who's been really influential in that world to me is the living legend, Sam Newsome. who plays soprano saxophone. And he's one of the best musicians I know who engages with multiphonics and in a certain way. So if you haven't checked out his music, I really recommend Sam Newsome.
So you'll listen to Sam Newsome play saxophone?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Anytime, any day, anything that Sam is on, I'm like, I have that. I have everything that he's ever done. I mean, I remember learning about him the first time through a jazz camp called Litchfield Jazz Camp in Connecticut when I was a kid. And
Oh, sure, yeah.
he wasn't on the faculty, but the person who I met on the faculty, his name was Dave Berkman. He's still around. He's a pianist, a wonderful pianist. And he had made a record and Sam was on this record. And I bought this record and I was like, oh my God, this is the best saxophone player I've ever heard in my entire life. And then I moved here and I have played with Sam. And he, for a second, had a band of 4 soprano saxophone players. And I was in that band with him and we were doing all the preparation. Talk about preparations. He's doing the prepared saxophone. And that's another influential figure for me. He's using tubes that are added to the mouthpiece. He's using wind chimes. He's used balloons. He's just the most creative spirit I've ever met. So he's a huge inspiration to me.
I'm bouncing around a little bit, but you mentioned something earlier about the communal time with the other artists, the meal times at the end of the day and things like that. Are you working out, or is it a forum to be able to work out artistic problems or influence each other? Like, I can only imagine an environment where you put, a small group of artists who are immersed in their work, not just who happen to be artists, but they're actually there working, put them together and then bring them together on a daily basis. I would have to think there's a charge in the air or an exchange in the air. And I guess there's a lot I'm asking there, but I think the crux of it is about the influences and being in the artistic community. Do you find that, the next morning they're there while you're working, sort of metaphysically?
Yeah, I'm down with that kind of a thought. One enjoyable thing for me as a musician is to be around non-musicians. I mean, we're around musicians so much and I love musicians, but I also really love non-musicians. So being around a filmmaker, for example, and talking to this filmmaker about another filmmaker that I really love, and then just hearing her take on this person that we both know. Or I was also at a different residency last year in Italy called Civitella, and I befriended a group of poets. And I was loving talking to them about poets and being like, do you think this poet is good? And they'd be like, absolutely not. That person is horrible. And then, understanding why that is, or hearing, oh yeah, this person is really something else. And then we would ogle over their poetry in certain ways, or they would like this book, but not this book. And I just loved that process of getting to know their world through my worlds. And then they would ask me about, oh, do you know the people here? And then I'd be like, oh yeah, this person's an asshole or something, or just, yeah, I would never work with them, and they're like, wow, fascinating. So you're just stepping into their world in certain ways. And so you kind of start to understand that we're all kind of the same in this certain way, but we all just have our interests that in our lane that we're in. And I would get so inspired by their work and hearing about, oh yeah, today there was a person there working at Ucross on a book about the food industry. And he was talking about how he worked at a very well-known fast food place for a time and kind of undercover. And then he was using a lot of that information in the book. And I don't know. And because nonfiction is not doing very well right now. And so to hear how inspiring he was and how dedicated he was to uncovering the information about this industry was, wow, that was so inspiring to me. And seeing people's visual art, the visual art studios are right next door to me. So I would go and visit the people there. And there's a woman there making paper from found grass at Ucross.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so she would create this pulp and then dry it out and then press it. And then there's this paper. And then she ended up doing the artwork for my record because I loved her work so much. Her name is Tulu Bayar. She's Turkish, and her whole process for making paper and then telling stories through her visual art was just I have to get you involved in this project. So yeah, I was really inspired by the people there, and it took me to a place.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the role of the ancestral figures, if you will, in the record. Steve Lacy, Geri Allen, etc. What is it that those people gave you that made it important to acknowledge them, but that also sort of manifests through your work?
Two of the people that I mentioned there, I was fortunate enough to meet, and that's Geri Allen and Thich Nhat Hanh. I didn't get to know Thich Nhat Hanh very well. I went to a meditation retreat at this center here in New York, and he was there, and he did all these guided meditations with us, and we did walking meditation. So it wasn't extremely well known for him, but Geri I worked with very closely, and she helped me to believe that my voice was something unique. She kept in touch with me and asked me like how I was doing on a regular basis. And I would go and see her play here. Last time I saw her was at the Village Vanguard. And that's right when she was starting her program in New Jersey for young girls in jazz. And that was really a special initiative that she believed very strongly in. And she asked me if I would be interested in participating, but she left us too soon. And the other two people I mentioned, Steve Lacy and Connie Crothers, are just musically speaking at the highest peak of mountain for me in their ways to access flow. Connie she comes from the lineage of Lenny Tristano. She was a student of Lenny Tristano's. And then I had met her because Lee Konitz, who was my teacher, mentioned her. And then I went to see her play the few times that she was playing here. It wasn't very often. And then I saw her out in the community a few times. And I never got to study with her, which I was really sad about. But she also left us kind of soon. And I listened to her interviews a lot and listened to her music all the time. And I had met also a collaborator of hers, Richard Tabnick, who's an alto saxophone player here, and he's on a lot of her records. So I learned a lot about her through him. Then Steve Lacy, who I didn't know, but obviously like one of the masters of the soprano saxophone, and his solo records in particular, not just the Monk records, but there's some other solo records, Sands. There's some other records that I love of his where he, explores different textures on the horn and different ways of playing. And his sound is like the woodiest that you can imagine on the soprano. I just love him so much. And so those two figures have been so influential to the way that I hear music because they're just in my head, even though we never met and we never played together.
When you were talking earlier, I don't know how serious you were about when you were saying you don't listen to the saxophone, because I've talked with other artists, and there's obviously a spectrum because everybody is so unique in their approach to their work. But some people don't still listen to a lot of music for fear of being influenced, or they don't listen to artists that play similar instruments because they don't want to steal licks or things like that. I'm curious what it's about to you. Like, do you not like the sound of the instrument, or is like what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, your first point was great because it's something I do on a regular basis. So because it's always in my face and it's on my body and in my mouth, I want to take some time away from it so I can gain perspective from another kind of a world. And so I'm kind of trying texturally to make my sound more like the voice in certain ways, or like trumpet in certain ways, or maybe I want it to sound like flute here, or how can I make it sound percussive, or how can it be a percussion instrument in this way? Can I make the saxophone sound like the piano? What's the texture that I can live inside versus spending an earlier part of my life totally immersed in Charlie Parker, for example, or totally immersed in Joe Henderson, Sonny Rollins, and some other people who have been madly influential to me, Lee Konitz, Lester Young. A lot of these musicians I've spent, hours transcribing and trying to learn about them and hearing their sound in my head. And I think that process of doing that sort of immersion or imitation is useful sometimes, but I also think it can be a little damaging if you stay inside of it for too long, because then you never become yourself, and you're just always trying to be someone else. Like there's a lot of people who sound like John Coltrane because he was just such a untouchable and incredibly talented human being. That's another influence of mine. But I think there will never be another one of him ever. And so trying to imitate and copy too much isn't what I'm so much interested in. And so, yeah, again, I'm not listening to a lot of this music right now in my life because I'm really just more interested in other textures and how they can manifest themselves on my saxophone. And I think a lot of people I'm not the only one who does this. Like Sam Newsome, I'm sure he has a similar way of looking at the horn. And I still enjoy listening to that music. I was listening to Charlie Parker the other day and really, enjoying myself. But yeah, I think it's a difficult instrument to get a good sound on, I will say. It's an easy instrument to learn. Like if you're just learning how to put your fingers down and press buttons, very easy. But to get a good sound on it, that's really tough. So I think there's people out there who really mastered the tone on the horn in different ways, and there are different ways of making tone on the horn. But I also think there's a lot of stuff out there which I just can't listen to because it's like you have to spend a little bit of time figuring out your tone. If you don't, it kind of shows. So I'm not really interested in listening to that music because sound is like number one for me. Sound, time, rhythm, creativity.
Yeah, I get that from some of the names you mentioned. Like when I think about someone who it's pretty clear spent time on their tone, like Joe Henderson would be pretty high on my list of
yes.
And I could listen to him endlessly.
Me too.
What are you drawn to? You've mentioned pianists a few times. Like when you're reaching for something to put on, do you have a go-to?
I think that really changes from week to week for me. I mean, it really, right now I'm listening to a lot of newer music. Well, that's not true because I was just listening to the Annette Peacock record. Called X Dreams or something like that. It's so, that was something that I was listening to literally yesterday and really enjoying myself. And James Blake's new record.
My son loves that record.
Yeah, I think it's called For Something for Trying Times. I was listening to Yeba's new record. There's a lot of jazz musicians on that record, Nate Smith and James Francis. That's been sort of on my rotation lately. And then all my friends' records, I'm playing tonight with Marta Sanchez. I was just listening to her new single that came out, and she's coming out with her record in a couple of weeks on Out of Your Head Records. Everything that Adam Hopkins is putting out on Out of Your Head Records is smashing. So I've been checking out the catalog there. Yeah, Pyroclastic. All just kind of like spending time with certain labels, and enjoying my time checking out the catalog and who's putting out new music these days. My friends. There's some great younger alto saxophone players that I'm really interested in out here. And also in LA, Nicole McCabe and Alden Helmuth. Both of those people put out records recently, or Alden was like a little bit ago, but enjoying listening to their records and seeing the lineage, how it works. I mean, I just spent time saying I don't listen to saxophone music, and I just named all these saxophones.
Caught you.
That's so funny. Yeah, I listen to, a lot of music, different songwriters. I love songwriting. And my friend Wendy Eisenberg is putting a record out, and their music is great. Yeah. And Mari, she's wonderful, always putting out new music. And my other friends, Kasim Nakvi, put out a orchestral piece that I just listened to. A lot of my friends around here and new music that's coming out. And then I was listening to the Mary Lou Williams, Cecil Taylor record live at Carnegie Hall. That's I don't know if you've heard that, but that's an interesting meeting of two minds from before. So that's an older record. And of course, Annette Peacock, that's older too. And then sometimes when I want to zone out, I'll gravitate to electronic music. So not that electronic music is something not to pay attention to, but I don't mean it like that, but I mean, if I want to sort of relax a little bit more, I'll put on someone like Warren and Barchi. I mentioned him before. And I don't think his music is like for relaxation purposes. It's not that. It's just I can find myself to feel like in a zone that's tantric in this certain way when I listen to his music.
Yeah. I was curious about your listenership or your interest in electronic music too, and how you're incorporating that.
Oh, yeah. And another influence there in the same way, but if I want a little more energy, is Juana Molina. She's an Argentinian singer-songwriter, but she also makes electronic music in her setup and looping. Her whole thing. I'm such a mega fan of what she does. So she's another influence of mine in the ways of electronic music.
When you were talking earlier about being out in nature and encountering the other creatures while you were at Ucross, the animals you saw every day, I'm curious what you knew about Wyoming before you went there. Were you surprised by what you found there? Had you been to Wyoming before? Like, what was the actual specific place experience like for you?
No, I had not been there before. I was trying to go in without much expectation because it's not like I had access to a car. And because where we were is in the northeast corner of the state, very close to the border of Montana. And I've been to Montana quite a few times, but never on the east side of the state, mostly Missoula and like the west side of Montana. So that was an interesting difference in the way the landscape had manifested, because there's fewer trees in the mountains there. And so you would go for a hike, which is something I did a lot of there in Wyoming, and get to the top of this precipice and just look out and there's no trees anywhere, which is like, that's not how it is over here in the West Coast. So, sorry, in the East Coast. Yeah. But I did also feel a lot of native spirit there. It seemed like there were also these places where the buffalo would they would corner buffalo and they would jump off, and that's how they would kill these buffalo, which those like areas and the craters that would be formed by these massive animals falling off of these cliffs were still in the land. Like, it's amazing to be able to see that part of how people lived there. But I didn't really know very much, and I didn't go very many places. So it was really just Ucross with like Piney Creek was the name of the creek that serviced that whole area. And it was really long creek. And then there's maybe just like one area or two areas of native land in Wyoming. There's more native land in, the surrounding states like the Dakotas and Montana, where native people are still living. And I really wanted to try to do that, but it was too far away. Like the area of land where native nations were living in Wyoming was like too far away for me to go. But I did in Montana, I had visited land where natives are living in the past and visited schools on that land. And it's been really a very unique and spiritual experience for me to do that. And I really would love to do more of that in the Dakotas. And I have some friends who are working for the Land Back initiative. Mm-hmm. So I've been trying to connect with them and see how there's a way to work together at some point. So.
It's like a wave. It's like a wave. It's like a wave. It's like a wave on the surface of the ocean. It's like a wave on the surface of the ocean. Beginning, ending, going up, going down, 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 up. But if the wave is aware that she is water, and she loses all these kind of fear. Going up, she's joyful. Going down, she's joyful. Because she knows that she is water.
You know, I'm from the East Coast originally as well. The Native American experience was always so abstract coming from the East Coast. It was, you know, if we learned at all, it was, you know, something that happened hundreds of years ago. It was like the Mayflower and Pilgrims, that kind of stuff. To come out here and to be in the Pacific Northwest, not only is the presence of the people still real, like the place names, and we live together, you know? I mean, it's just it's just the presence is more real. And the experience of the struggle that they had with settlers and with white people was not that long ago. Like the last armed conflicts in the Seattle area were like in 1918. Like, you know, up until very recently, there were people alive that would have experienced that or had witnessed it or certainly knew about it firsthand. That's been a very big eye-opening part of moving out here, is to experience the realness of the Native American experience, you know, in my own limited way as a middle-aged white man, but even just observing. It's very different than as someone who spent so much of their life on the East Coast.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a lot more going on and a lot more opportunity. Like Ucross even has a fellowship for Native American artists across all genres of art. So like when I was there was a Native American art exhibit happening at the art gallery that's on the land. So that's one place that we could go, is look at the art gallery, which is a small place. But all the art that was being showcased there when I was there in March of 2025 was made by Native visual artists. And it was beautiful because they had, trying to remember the name of this photographer, but basically this person had dressed up in traditional Native costume and dress, and they were on the Ucross land and they were interacting with like all the buildings there. And they had taken photographs interacting with the buildings. And I thought that was such a really interesting way to deal with, okay, they're dressing up like the Indians who used to live on this land. Specifically, like there were a few different nations, the Cherokee Nation and Lakota, I think Oglala Lakota, maybe Shoshone. I think that was another nation that was involved in around the area of Ucross. Anyway, so they were trying to showcase like the traditional dress of all of these nations and then interact with like the structures and buildings that were on this land now. It's really a captivating exhibition and really like appropriate for us to be there and see, oh, these. And so I had a lot of visions of what life must have been like on this land before we got there. How do we honor the people who were here before, and how do we like bring them into the community? It's really cool to see how they've been doing that and making space for natives there at the residency. Been really beautiful to see.
I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about the interest in the work you do alongside the justice system, how and if it intersects with your artistic pursuit.
Yeah, so most of my interest in advocacy has been in two worlds. One has been through the world of gender advocacy, and the other one is for incarcerated people. For gender, I've been working at the New School. I teach a course on gender and jazz with my colleague, whose name is Sarah Elizabeth Charles. She started the program there, and we've been doing that together for about 8 years now. And that's been a beautiful community to continue every semester and talk through issues that continue to plague the jazz and improvised music communities that with respect to gender expression and sexual orientation. The other side of my advocacy has been through the prison industrial complex. I have a family member who was previously incarcerated, which is kind of how I got involved with advocacy, because I started seeing and just being more realizing as I was getting older how much the system has affected my family's life. That was not here in the US because my family's from Europe, and so different carceral system. But I started, contacting people here, namely political prisoners who had been involved in some kind of cause and had been locked up because of that or due to some kind of activity related to that, like people in the Black Panther Party, Angela Davis and Jalil Muntakim. Those two people are still living and out of prison or out of jail. I know Angela was only in prison for a very short amount of time, or jail. And then Jalil was in prison for over 40 years, and I befriended him by writing letters to him. Just the awareness of freedom fighting and how that can influence your freedom is really just a wild set of circumstances that I've learned about through contacts with both of those people. So yeah, I've been getting involved more through other organizations. I also perform with a group that is working towards freedom for Keith Lamar, who is a person on death row in Ohio, who is wrongfully convicted for a crime he did not commit and has now been in solitary confinement for over 30 years. Execution date is set for January of 27. I'm going to visit him on Sunday, so I'll see him in a few days. And then I go in semi-regularly to Sing Sing prison in Austining with Musicambia, which is an organization that provides music classes for people inside. So not just at Sing Sing, but also Rikers. And they go to some other facilities. One of them is Bedford Hills in New York. That's a women's prison. And then they go to a facility in South Carolina that I don't know the name of. And then I think there's another one in Kansas or Missouri. So they've been sort of expanding their work to other states, which is beautiful. But I've been really enjoying those classes and getting to know working with the guys in there. And it's been an amazing experience to be involved. So it's like several levels, but I would call myself a prison abolitionist, even though I'm very much woven into the fabric of activities inside prisons. So it's a confusing and often cognitively dissonant way of life that I'm living here, because I know that prison abolition isn't possible at this moment. It's like it's going to take a lot, for us to reverse this whole system, because we have 2 million people now who are locked up in immigration detention centers, jails, prisons.
And now there's a financial motive.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm also on the board for this wonderful record label called Freer Records. And we put out records of people who are either still in prison or people who just got out of, or who have been out of prison for a while, who want like recording careers. So that's the basis of our label. And I'm on the board for that. And that work has been so illuminating for me to see people making music and trying to make a better life for themselves, because getting out and then trying to make a life for yourself is one of the hardest things that you can do as a human being. Just even getting an ID. I was talking to one of the artists affiliated with Musicambia a couple months ago, and he was just having a problem even just getting an ID, and had to track down his mom, who he didn't have a great relationship with, and have her call this place in Colorado to get the birth certificate reprinted they had to talk to her, and just like the whole, and then meanwhile he can't work because he doesn't have an ID. So the whole thing is completely a wreck. So I'm just trying to do as much as I can. But sometimes I have to step away a little bit, because advocacy work can completely take over your life. And so it's like it's there, and I'm doing the best that I can. And I'm mostly here, making music and practicing and touring. So I've been trying to balance all of that.
Well, thank you for that work and for the music and for your time. It was great talking with you.
Yeah, thanks, Lawrence. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Caroline Davis, and thank you for tuning into the Tonearm. If you enjoyed this conversation, check out the over 300 episodes available in our free archive at thetonearm.com. While you're there, join our mailing list or consider becoming a paid supporter. The Tonearm is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson. Editing and sound design is by Terry Grant, and our theme music is by Birdie, spelled Burdy. Thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.
After listening to this episode, head to thetonearm.com, our online journal covering unexpected music and culture. Right now on the Tonearm, you'll find features on jazz cellist Tomika Reed, Portishead and Massive Attack collaborator Bill Fuller, theatrical Ukrainian folk band Yagodi, German Kosmic music pioneer Redelius, and so much more. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter, Talk of the Tonearm. That's thetonearm.com. The Tonearm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.